I'll be your host. I'm Strother Bullins. Among other things, I'm a drummer, but I ended up growing up and being a technology editor at New Bay Media, which is Pro Sound News, Pro Audio Review, mix sound video contractor, among other things. That's my only plug for that. I'm really happy to be here today with these guys, and following the panel, there'll be a coffee hour for conversations with the panelists, and I'm going to introduce everybody. Please fill in the blanks, if you will. First, this is Mitch, musician, songwriter, engineer, producer, an indie rock hero for me, author of a soundtrack of many of our lives, from the band Less Active to, oh man, REM, the Connells, personal plug there, and likes of Marshall Crenshaw, Don Dixon. And he's also the owner proprietor of the Fidelatorium, which is right down the road in Kernersville. And Google Mitch too. I'll let you know even more about him that way. Next we have Kent Margraves, audio engineer, product specialist for audio firms, includes Sennheiser, DigiDesign, presently at Music Group. That's right. At Music Group, you will know Music Group, they have a broad range of products, just many products. Actually, they were just using the console next door, which is was it that the X32? So, and notably, Wingate University grad, right here, keeping it local. Yeah, been a while. Yeah, I hear you. Same here. To App State. So, Kyle Welch is next, audio engineer, live sound specialist, live sound instructor at the Blackbird Academy in Nashville, which if you're not familiar with that, studio and a school right there in Berry Hill, beautiful Berry Hill. UNC Greensboro grad, jazz, classical guitar. Attendee. He attended, he went there, he was there. And Guilford Technical Community College's entertainment technology grad as well. So if I missed anything, please fill in the blanks. But this hour is going to go really quick. I did this last year, and I know these kind of things. We can go down many rabbit holes. So let's go and get started. The subject of this talk is about gear, and of course, as among any artists, especially among any musicians, audio engineers love some gear, and we have sometimes a love-hate relationship with it, and but we do turn to it and have a lot of passion about it. Maybe to get started with, I just wanted to have more of a simple question is, gear sometimes changes the way we work, whether we like it or not, and perform, or both. So I wanted to start off with this, just within the last 5 years, and maybe after that we could look at the last decade or even in the last year. Are there pieces of gear or categories of gear that have changed the way you work for the better? Maybe, hopefully we start here with Mitch.
Maybe speakers are better. When you hear old studio speakers, the ones everybody mixed on this 9 years ago, I don't know what that means exactly. The records are great, but the speakers sound weird. So I think speakers are better. I'll say that. I don't know if anything else is better. Electricity is about the same. But it does seem to get sort of scrambled around a little differently. But I think my job is sort of changed very incrementally. I don't think it's, even the big sort of analog digital flip or whatever didn't really affect what we do that much. I think kind of interesting. Those speakers, yeah. So are headphones.
My perspective is all live sound. So I would say measurement systems, acoustic measurement systems for live sound, like Smart Live, System, things like that allow us to see sound in real time as we're either tuning or mixing. And that's changed what I do a lot, because many times I go into venues where someone else is optimizing the system and I didn't have control over that. I can quickly see if a PA is out of alignment, or say there's front fill speakers in front of the stage that aren't timed properly. That's very easy to know how to set up a microphone and measure that. So prior to being able to do that, it was pretty tough. It may not be in the last 5 years, maybe the last 10, but still, that's a big thing. So computer-based sound measurement.
I'm also from a touring and live sound standpoint. I'd probably say two things from my first, along the lines of what Mitch said. Speakers, particularly with liner rails and the formats being a bit smaller and lighter, you still have the same amount of bang for your buck that you might have had to have twice as many boxes in a box that was 2 times as big. 5 years ago, getting done by a box that's half that size and weighs half as much, so that saves space in the truck, saves on fuel, saves on loading time, saves on load out time. So that, and when things are lighter, we like that. And then I would say probably too, along the lines of software, is wireless spectrum management. It's gotten a lot better. So if you're deploying 30, 50, or 100 channels RF, it used to be the really good tools were really expensive and they weren't all that good, I'd say 5 or 10 years ago. And now with things like wireless workbench, some I know Sennheiser has their version of the same thing, WSM, I think you know, the software is free, and for the cost of a network switch, you can scan the environment pretty easily with your current hardware. Granted, you would be band limited to what that hardware can scan, so you can still do that. That's it.
Something that actually a couple of you kind of mentioned that on the listening side of things, obviously if gear has improved and we're able to hear what has been captured by the microphones or committed to tape the hard drive or whatever. While the gear maybe hasn't changed, does it allow you to hone in on more of these pieces of gear that you've had in the past? And Mitch, you alluded to that if you can hear better with better speakers, if it opens up more possibilities for this gear that you may have loved and used for 20 years, or things that you depend upon. Like, what does that bring to the table when you say, my monitors are better than they have been in the past? Does that allow you more opportunity, or what does that do for you?
I mean, it must, at a theoretical level, but at the practical level, it all gets strange, doesn't it? Because, studio engineers for a long time done a lot of the work on bad speakers, with the assumption being that the listening environment is so, and it's never been more variable than it is now, I mean, it's like, you used to have sort of like, car sound was a certain kind of drumming thing, and there was the sort of cassette mid-5, and LP was, it's really simple. There's like a million variations of listening situations now, many of which are real hypey and with their own processing combinations. So I would say we have more information and a whole lot more confusion, and I think maybe the reason why a lot of the old records stand up is because maybe it was a sort of a fight through the mud in a way, to get to the thing in the end, but it involved paying a whole lot of attention all the time and getting really, really solid things that can cut through whatever we're fighting, whether it's noise or lack of frequency response. None of those things are a problem now, but getting effective sound is still tough. I've done this for a long time. I'm completely mystified by it, is what I'm saying. Like, what I'm mystified by, and I say this to everybody that knows me says, will know the story, but I'm always mystified by the fact that the same records are played in bars that were always played in bars, most of which were recorded 40 years ago. What is up with that? I mean, there are magnificent sounding recordings now, but there's something about the kind of, what we might call mid-fi now about that stuff that makes it effective. So in the studio, we're kind of going for effectiveness, not really transparency or accuracy or anything in pop music. So in theory, I mean, I'm sure that at the sort of high end of the spectrum, there are the best sounding recordings ever made with these tools that have now. But in the pop music world, it's very strange. It's almost about an emotional reaction.
That's right.
We have a lot more ways to get there. And I really enjoy the modern equipment, but I find that the whole thing of it is as mysterious as ever, which actually keeps it interesting.
Do you think that with like less trips to the car, like used to, when you car referencing, there's so many different elements that you're considering now. Who's listening to this? By what means are they listening to it? Listening to earbuds, and also, like you said, the processing that whether they're listening to it on their iOS device or whether they're listening to it on vinyl. There's so many different things to consider. Does that make the job harder? Because you referred to the whole fact that these bar records
they were all kind of going to vinyl first, it seems
I
like.
think there's a lot of things that we've come out on the other side of, and one of them may be this like second guessing thing. Because when, I mean, I was as happy as any, I mean, I jumped on that total listen in the car bandwagon because I thought, what a great idea. And it was just kind of a way to break up the session. But my conclusion now is like, it is completely, you'll just never know what other people are listening on, you know, and all those records that they play in the bar, you know, that was from the days of the studios having the studio monitors. They didn't have 3 sets of speakers or even 2 sets of speakers. Even the Aratone thing is ish, you know? I don't think you need to do that. I just think you need to get used to your speakers and like what you got, and then you just gotta throw it out there like seeds in the wind, you know? Because I just don't think you can second guess it that much. You just can't. I mean, you know, if you get the bass right on one thing and it's completely crazy on something else, it's probably just sort of not right, you know? But I mean, it's weird. You have to sort of learn how to listen, but you also have to learn how to figure out what other people are doing and decide whether you're going to pay attention to it or not. I mean, my little story about that freaked me out that I learned absolutely nothing from, but it happened, was the guy who kept telling me the mix didn't have enough bass on it. And then I found out he was listening on his phone, but I don't mean with earbuds, I mean just on his phone. So, of course, it's maybe had some effect on the bass sound, you know. But it did also say, well, maybe the bass did need more stuff in the upper frequency so you could hear what the part was, you know. I mean, that is kind of useful, but you know what I mean? It gets a little crazy when you try to second guess everything everybody's going to listen to. You just can't. You know? But again, these records that have an emotional response from people, they're fine, you know, they're fine anyway. So I think if you like your listening environment in the studio and you leave at the end of the day feeling like it's good, it probably is. And you have to just let go of it.
Specifically with live performance, we'll get into a little bit of that too, because you know, we have 2 live engineers here looking more at the live realm, and also as a performer yourself, as an artist, not just an engineer or producer. Are there new products, as far as gears are concerned, that have enabled musicianship, not so much in the engineering thing, but the actual instruments themselves, whether they be guitars themselves, the guitar improvements, you know, in technology. Like I said, referred to earlier, I'm a drummer, and drums have not changed a lot over the years, drums themselves, but what have changed is the hardware. It's so much, you know, the squeaky hi-hat that wanders around and not double braced. These things that we've kind of overcome. It seems things do get easier to use over time. Are there any particular products or tech trends that have either helped musicianship, and then in the middle we'll talk about hindering musicianship and the lack of development thereof, but that's a different story. Any thoughts?
In-ear monitoring. That changes everything on stage, right? So I've seen many times, and I've helped some artists make that transition a few years ago to in-ears. And it's a tough transition, particularly for vocalists, because of course the instrument's in the head, the whole binaural summation, acoustics and all that gets really weird. But some musicians, you know, they get on in-ear monitors and then start going, oh, I need to work on woodshedding a little bit, and playing tighter, or playing in the live environment. So that's a good and bad thing, but a big change.
I'd agree with that on the IAM side of the monitors. I think that can be good and bad, but I think mostly good for performers. And I've watched guitar players that I've worked with, particularly on an acoustic part, where maybe they really have to dig into that way to be able to hear the acoustic through the wedges and get it over the top of the, no offense, the drummer on the stage, right? But if you put in-ears in, he can play much more naturally, like he'd be in a rehearsal studio at his house or wherever, he's not having to overly dig into. So the more delicate parts can come through nicer. And I think as far as technology goes, one that kind of blows me out, and I just had a demo of this a couple of days ago, and I was on a tour that was using it this past year and the year before, is the Kemper amplifier model is out of sight. I didn't want to like it, and I'm a two-man snob guitar player, and you know, there were the Line 6 pods out for a while, and then a couple other ones, and there's some other companies had it, but that thing is very cool. And for $3,000, I think, and it has the power amp in it, you can take 1,000 amplifiers with it. It's very cool.
I don't know, the maybe the breakthrough music technology that I enjoying is today's cheap guitars, which are great. You know, like cheap guitars used to be, cheap guitar, you can't really use it. Now cheap guitars are totally excellent. I guess because they're made by computers. I love that, you know, because the idea that it's crushing expense to get your instrument, you know, is just fun. I'm having a lot of fun with $300 guitars. They're totally fun. Yeah. So that's the breakthrough.
Very cool. Something kind of refreshing about that too, the same way that pro audio changed so much, you know, around ADAT time, that suddenly artists could record themselves, and with a good ear and a lot of ambition, they could make something that sounded better than a 4-track cassette or whatever. And now today, the same way that there are instruments that, like I said, you look at drums and very inexpensive things that they're allowing people to do so much more than they used to today. That's really cool. That's interesting to think about. And on the other side of things, changes that have happened in products that you think have hindered musicianship. These might be necessarily products or just trends in technology and other creative devices. Any thoughts there?
Well, I'll try and make it quick. But what I'm going to say is that, you know, the computer world has made everybody kind of go insane, and then you have to regain their sanity. You know, I thought that not having to worry about punching in or multiple takes would make people relax more in the studio, but it made people think that nothing was ever good enough, and they had to just do a billion takes, and that's just so bad. You know, it makes the whole thing such a grind. So the old limitation of like, sorry, we're out of tracks, that solo was actually pretty good. You know, it was actually a huge relief to people that you could not offer to people. You're like lying to them if you say that, you know. So everybody has had to, but I see that happening. I see people not being as sort of, but it led to a sort of compulsiveness for a while. But I think, again, we're coming out on the other side, so I don't know. But that was weird and unfortunate. But, you know, but at the same time, there'd be no way that I would say that it was as bad. We have to outlaw those things. I mean, they're great, but it was weird, that effect. You know? So I think it was a hindrance for a while, but I don't think it's anymore. And now, you know, like this morning I was playing a solo for somebody and they just sent it to me through email with a track to play to. So that was fantastic, you know, so never complain about it. But it does change some of the attitudes sometimes until people figure out how to not worry about it. Because in the studio, I think the whole challenge is to get people to not worry, really. I mean, you know, they need to be kind of happy and think they're cool so they play well, you know, if you're just, you know what I mean? So perfection has its place, but it's only like as much, it's not the whole thing. So I think anything that gets music beyond the worry and back into the fun, why you started doing this in the first place, all that, that's important to handle too, not let the machines get in the way of that.
Moving on to some technological challenges that we look at later. You know, earlier we were talking about, you know, A over IP, you know, audio over internet protocol, things now where, you know, we're actually pulling less cable through walls and where we could actually pull a Cat5 cable through the wall, actually allowing more people to have access to multi-channel systems. We've had, you know, the state of wireless, what's going on now. The interesting thing is that I wanted to kind of talk about this, even though this is about gear, I want to briefly talk about acoustic environments in performance spaces, because regardless of what happens with gear, regardless what we're able to do to replace analog gear from the past and various technologies, we still have not sufficiently recreated a space, an acoustically superior space cannot be recreated digitally. It is arguable that there are things that you can do there, but also a collaborative space where everyone can work together. You know, is that something that cannot be emulated? You know, because our jobs are capturing the performances and packaging them for consumption from other people. Are there things that you've seen that are interesting as far as acoustic treatment products, or things that, you know, in redoing rooms, or even if it's a live sound thing, you go somewhere, it's like, talk about tuning rooms, that is a tool to allow you to work around those things. But then again, you hit that venue that is a great sounding venue, then all of a sudden your job is so much easier. And, you know, I just don't know if there have any comments about that topic in general.
In the touring industry anyway, there's not a lot, I mean, because you kind of get where you land that day.
Yeah.
And in some rooms, there's sound better than others. If you're doing, a couple thousand seat rooms, theaters, or smaller performing arts centers, stuff like that, that's better. If you're doing 10,000, 20,000 seat arenas, probably the best thing you can do to make it sound better is to turn it down a little bit, excite a little less. And I see a lot of guys try to go the other way and overpower the bad acoustics, which just makes more bad acoustics. And so, bring it down to 4.5, 6 dB and probably sound better. But I think also with the current speaker technology, where we can be much more directional, particularly with line arrays and being able to zone stuff out, you can make it sound more the same in the front row as it does in the back row, because you're putting more of that direct energy to where there's a human transducer, not off of an acoustic surface to reflect back. I mean, it's still going to reflect back. It's going to get better. And I think the technology that we have too now, where we have steerable subwoofers, cardioid pattern subwoofers and things like that, where we can keep the bass off the wall, or keep the bass off the stage. The performer doesn't want to hear it. There's some newer advantages that we have from acoustic.
So I have a question for you all. Okay, do you know the venue, it's the big Coliseum place in Raleigh,
Where they play the hockey games?
where they have big runs?
Yeah.
So I saw the Who there a couple years ago.
Okay.
And it was maybe the best sound I've ever heard in a big place like that.
Right.
Because, all this fantastic technology is dumped into these kind of horrible sounding
Right.
giant
Sure.
oil tanks,
Yeah.
So, this didn't sound like that. And it was the line array things, like we were standing around after the show and they had taken it all down incredibly fast. It's
Yeah.
like the whole thing was so modern and efficient, I was
Yeah.
really amazed. But is that a particularly good room, or is it that the guy that makes it, who's been mixing it for something like 40 years or something, is he just that good? What was going on? That
that's
was
a pretty
amazingly
critical-
good sound.
I would say that was probably 3 factors. One, choice of how much PA they put and where they pointed it,
Yeah.
which that goes into the second factor, which would be the system engineer that tuned and deployed it. And then finally, let's not take anything away from the guy that actually mixed it.
It sounded great.
I think that's
Because
three
normally
elements
like half
all
your
together.
brain is engaged in filtering out the
Right.
It
Right.
means nothing.
Well,
It's just loud.
And you just want to wait 40 minutes until you get used to the bad sound and just listen beyond it.
It was kind of thrilling,
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
great.
it can. Yeah, it can.
It does have.
Yeah.
And I think it's happening more often, which is great.
Well, I haven't been to really big rock shows, so I didn't know if that's become normal, but I kind of couldn't
No.
believe it because the acoustics are usually so,
It's probably 50-50, I'd say.
Because I was looking at it, like I didn't see anything too obvious that they had right on acoustic, but they probably did.
In a space of that volume, it's really hard to do acoustical treatment at low frequencies because the wavelengths are so long and it takes such mass and depth. So what I've learned is, in being in a lot of thousands of venues, is you're asking about acoustical products. Sometimes people attempt to do acoustics exclusively by just damping things, and if that's with things that are thin, what happens sometimes is people take all the top end out of the room, damp the highs and the mids, but it has nothing to do with the low frequencies. So what you end up with is a muddier room. It's actually worse. Sometimes you have to spend money to do marginal acoustical treatment. The good news is, if the budget's there, the acoustical treatment can all be modeled, and if somebody knows what they're doing, can be very accurate. So, I would also point out that while it's not an acoustical product for live venues, but it kind of indirectly is, the way loudspeakers are developed these days, and you've already alluded to it with line arrays and things, but if you think of pattern control, the radiation pattern of a loudspeaker, it's frequency dependent. And so 20 years ago, any box that said, I'm 90 degrees wide, some 40 degrees tall, whatever it is, that was only true in the mid-range and higher frequencies. And as we get down to low, mid, and bass frequencies, a lot of them were omnidirectional. And it has to do with physics, the way the boxes are made, and now also how they couple together. But as manufacturers get better at making that broad band, now we see some loudspeakers where they specify it's this many degrees wide, this many tall, and that actually is true over a wide range of frequencies. So how that interacts with the room is a huge improvement. For several manufacturers now do a good job of it. And it's not an acoustical product, but I think it does while it doesn't change the acoustical property of the room, it doesn't light up some of the problems in venues when that's properly deployed. The other thing you talked about a little, I've reinforced is sub-based directivity, whether it's cardioid arrays, there's in-fire subs and things like that, but ways of deploying subwoofers so that the low energy is also directional, not just the top.
Interesting, it wasn't too long ago that I actually did a tour of it was a major tour, and we went to a shed in Charlotte, did the full thing, and it was actually one of the first deployments of a major innovation in the line manufacturer. And it was the first time that I actually heard really good sound at the shed. It was almost like the shed, by sounding bad for so long, pushed the manufacturers to use this technology to get the sound right to the point, and then that's it. It didn't bounce off anything else. It did, it was finally, it was almost like the bad environment created that technology.
And there's other acoustic modeling technologies cool too. You can do a lot of pre-planning, things like ease focus. JBL has, most manufacturers now have a proprietary software that you can download, load their products into it, and you can put CAD drawings or do your own drawings in the software. So if you can get with the technical director, get your production manager, get that data, and you can put that into your computer and actually deploy the system and at least visually see how we think it's going to work before we get there. So it takes a lot of the guessing out when you're there. You don't have to hang the box 4 different times to get it where you want it to be.
Actually, I want to talk about a live sound aspect of this as well, because we actually alluded to it in the last group. But today, as far as gear is concerned and recording yourself, there are a lot of self-recordists that are collaborating with proper engineers, where things are being made in different ways. And Mitch, you mentioned doing a solo for a one-off solo and being able to send things back and forth. Thanks to our technology today. But with the incredible Shrinking Studio that is out there as far as gear is concerned and what musicians themselves are able to use, are there gear or tips to gearing up for either the self-recordist, the burgeoning engineer, the artist that wants to collaborate with his peers more effectively, or the artist that will come and record at your studio? Maybe they can't be there the whole time, but you're going to get tracks and you're going to get files from people, and you say, wow, I really wish they had this front end, or they had this that would allow this to be better or worse. If I could guide them, I would tell them, buy this and don't spend so much on this. Are there any tips that you would give there?
Oh, me? Well, I think, one or two things that sounds good and you're fine. One good microphone, one good input thing and a recording thing is probably all you need. And I say one and not two because stereo is completely overrated, and you don't have to worry about stereo. You just need some good sounds. You can pan them all over the place. Fake stereo is fine. Putting reverb on things to generate stereo, that's fine too. I really have this super non-purist view about this, but it is true with something like a voice. If you right up front record a bunch of kind of painful artifacts, they are hard to get rid of. You can get rid of them better than you ever could, but you're never going to have a sound that's really got a lot of life to it because you've had to smash down the nasty bits, But having said that, you don't have to spend a lot of money to do that. One of the things that I meant to say about improvements is microphones. Also, we're, I think, in the golden age of microphones, and you can spend not a lot of money and get something that is quite good. And yeah, the thing that you can rent from Blackbird that you can never afford is maybe more sexy somehow, but it doesn't matter really for 99% of the things that you do. So yeah, that's it. Nothing else matters. Just one or two things that's kind of clear. Everything else you can mess up. I mean, this is for what we do, which is again like pop music. I'm not talking about classical recordings or anything. But I think you could probably spend under $500 and make a record that a lot of people would really talk about if you were clever. That's what I think.
Maybe from the live sound perspective, because we're talking about technologies today that allow you, not to have to pull all this cable, not to have traditional snakes like we used to have, big snakes, and actually sit there with various mixing tools. Someone that was getting started to build their own rig today that was going to be a live sound professional and service people, how would you guide them to make wise purchasing decisions?
I think kind of what Mitch said, maybe in a way, is get the right microphone, just get it right at the source. That's the easiest way to get good sound. I see too many guys that they don't have it right at the source, the mic's in the wrong place, or whatever, and so they pile plug-in after plug-in after plug-in after plug-in on top of it to try to make it sound right, and now you're just making it sound processed or different.
Yeah.
It just sounds
Different
computerized.
flavor of
So
both.
yeah, so I think get the right microphone in there. You don't have to spend a ton of money. I mean, my favorite microphone on planet Earth is SM58. $100 for a live vocal, and an SM57. Give me a box of 57s and 58s, we'll be fine. Maybe some 421s, but outside of that, I think get it to sound right at the source. Take the time, if you have the time, in rehearsals or whatever, to find the sweet spot on that guitar amp for that microphone and roll it. And then, don't reach for, if you can, don't reach for your EQ first. Reach for the microphone first. I think that's the advice I would give.
Totally agree. I would remind us all that that is very true, as well as mic placement, mic selection and mic placement. Many years ago, I was, I don't know how old I was. I was really young, and we were at a studio in the evening getting free time because we had done some work. They used to align tape machines, and the guy that owned the studio had been around for like 300 years or something. I mean, he just knew everything. And he wasn't really paying attention to us, but he was in the studio, and we were working to get a guitar sound. We had a little electric cabinet, and we had some 57s. We were moving mics around, and we kept running through the control room and turning knobs on his console. And we were turning EQ filters way, way, way too much, because we just didn't know. And he finally said something that just stuck with me for more than 30 years. He said, "I remember when we got EQ without EQ." And what he meant was, he had been recording long enough to remember when they had to use mic technique to get tonal changes, because the filters either weren't there or they just weren't good enough to do a lot of tweaking on. So if you think about any microphone, it's got an axis, right? This is 0 axis, this is 180, and they all have different sounds as you turn them. The sensitivities change and all that, but also the tonal qualities change on directional microphones. So guitarists sometimes always have one place, especially live. Sometimes they even put on their amp, on the grill cloth, they'll put tape or an X and say, put the mic here. But it doesn't take an engineer for someone like a musician who doesn't want to think like an engineer, a guitarist, to know if I move the microphone toward the center of the cone, I'm going to get more brightness, more high frequencies. If I move it just an inch or two away from the center of the cone, I get a darker sound. So mic technique is huge. It's every bit as big as mic selection, I think.
Well, if you look at an old enough audio book, EQ is called corrective equalization.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like more of a medical situation, like to stop the bleeding or something.
Yeah.
It was when you would get out the corrective equalization. So,
Yeah.
worth keeping that in mind.
Well, I was in an event one time where several mix engineers were challenged, and it was tough, but we did it, to do a little mix-off, compare mixes. We had 15 minutes on 3 passes or so on a song in a virtual sound check. And high-pass filters and low-pass filters were all we were able to use, and it worked. It's much more fun live when you're under the pressure and doors are going to open or whatever. Just start scooping the low mids out of something or whatever, rather than run to the stage and move the mic. But at the source is always better.
It seems today, this is kind of changing gears a little bit, talking about client expectations, whether the client is a separate client or the client is actually the artist themselves. There are high expectations for audio quality because people are exposed to a wide variety of things, and I kind of feel, and please weigh in on this, I kind of feel like we're at a period in pop music history where everything is popular. There were eras where there were trends and things that were very faddish, but today, especially young music fans are exposed to things. They are huge fans of great classic bands from the late 60s and early 70s, as well as an artist that'd be in the 90s and then a new artist today. And what they expect and the sounds that they know are possible span that entire space. And with everything that's possible, and with people knowing that you can punch in infinitely, and I have an infinite amount of tracks, and I have an infinite amount of possibilities. To the musician, to the artist, is it harder to serve those clients? Is it also, what sort of things are possible or not possible when you have people that have I think there's just high expectations. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I'm just going to talk about the era that we're in.
I mean, for us in our studio, I think the expectations just sort of shift around a little bit, but they're always kind of okay because we're not making like, full-on radio rock, perfection, Nashville hit kind of stuff, hardly ever. Like, nobody wants that in our place. So, like you were talking about the squeaky hi-hats, like, our clientele are pretty excited if the hi-hat is squeaky, you know what I mean? So that's great for us. We can use artifacts to show how, like, the interesting details that we have. And, you're really inside the music. Check it out. You can hear that bass drum pedal squeak, just like on that Zeppelin record. And there's so many squeaky pedals on their records. They must have liked it. But, in general, we're always told that stuff's bad. Now we're in a time when that stuff's good. And it can become kind of silly, but actually it's kind of great, It seems like there is a wide open thing that's not chaos, that it's sort of about a desire to feel like you're listening to something real, and I love that. I mean, and having said that, I love electronic music, but I also love the squeaky hi-hats and stuff, and our clientele, they like it all. So they're not really demanding in any one. In other words, when I used to read magazines about recording when I was first getting interested in this, it was definitely all oriented towards sort of slick commercial rock, and it was slightly intimidating. You would read about, SIR sending over 25 bass drums, before Mick Fleetwood was totally happy. And I thought, boy, that's really sounds boring, but that's kind of, I guess there's still records like that, but now you just use a sample, which is actually probably better, But I think that the desire for something real is huge now, more than, I don't know, it's again, it's about just the emotional reaction. And maybe it's because we have no music industry at all. There's no sort of arbiters of taste telling us, no, that's not good enough, it's sloppy. Really kind of successful records that I hear now have a lot of kind of slop in them, but you can tell it's very good slop and they know what they're doing. I don't know, I'm pretty happy about all that.
Yeah.
So there are expectations just about what this really should be about, which is like, I want to hear that, and that's great, as opposed to, you know what I mean, as opposed to having sort of like standards of quality that are kind of predictable.
Right.
I mean, having said that, there is something they got right in the classic rock era, obviously, because those songs keep getting listened to, for better or worse. But I'm relieved that we have not just that one standard now for like rock music. So, I mean, you can never be lame, no matter what that means. But as long as it's not lame, you're okay. And I think that makes this a kind of a great time for recording and sound.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think in the live industry, artists are very emotional people, and everybody's insecure. Most people, I think, are a little bit insecure. And so especially for an artist, if you're going to go take this art that you've created and you want to now give it to a bunch of people live, it makes them quite nervous. And I think the most important thing that we can do as engineers is to figure out what makes them comfortable. And if you can figure out how to make them comfortable on stage, then you start sort of this trust back and forth, and you can say to them, hey, I think we need to change the tone on that amp. Or they'll say, hey, how was it done? You say, it was great, and they'll believe you. And I have worked with artists that'll be on their wireless, they'll come out and stand next to the front of house and listen to it and say, okay, change X, Y, and Z, and say, okay, no problem. And so I think it's just being able to make them comfortable. I had one artist that I toured with, he was a keyboard player. I literally had to measure with a tape measure where his keyboard went every night in relationship to the lead singer and the downstage edge. But that made him comfortable that I did that. So, okay. And I think that almost becomes more important than the fidelity, because if they're comfortable, they're going to perform better. And I'd rather listen to a really great performance that's maybe not the most best mix we could absolutely have, because it's going to have the mojo, rather than somebody who's just playing and they're nervous about it and it's not going to come across the same. I don't know if that answers your question. That's a thought.
You know, that brings up a thought. We used to say, or I used to say, you know, artists never know what they really sound like in a live performance because they're behind the PA system. And virtual sound check changes that. You know, if you have virtual sound check, after a sound check or rehearsal, whatever, you can actually have the artist come sit from the audience perspective and not only hear, but actually have input on the mix quality. You know, you could put up a mix if you're confident enough to with a client and say, hey, this is how I just mixed you. What do you think? And they may love it or not, but at least they have input and have a way of getting the audience perspective. Virtual sound check is not a tough technology today for live people. If you're on a digital console product, you probably have a way to do virtual sound check fairly easily. So that kind of changes the game. It also opens up some politics potentially, you know, but that's okay.
This is a final question, which might be a little bit out there, but this is kind of talking about education. Talking about currently, you know, there's a lot of talk about how, you know, curriculum in schools, which obviously affects our next generation of artists. With Common Core being something where people are pushing a lot of math and technical things. Recently, they've started to reintroduce the idea of having more than math and English language arts and science, and putting back in arts integration back into the schools to balance out what this Common Core thing is. I would just like for you guys to maybe touch on the fact that, and we were kind of talking about this too, about whether the whole fact of, you know, we have the tools to make things sound perfect as opposed to we have things to make them sound human and expressive. In schools, or, you know, in nurturing artists, how important do you think, you know, arts integration is, so that, because it seems like, you know, a Common Core type thing is teaching students to get things right, whereas more of arts integration is teaching students to express themselves, and to, which actually, interestingly enough, makes them better math students. So any thoughts about, you know, how we nurture, besides just being a musician, how do we nurture this next generation of content creators? Is what they essentially are, and what we are as well. Any thoughts about education from a producer's perspective?
Well, yeah, you know, I think the old notion of a liberal education was not such a bad idea. The Americans seem to be really bad about this sort of pendulum way of living, like, oh my God, you can never eat anything with fat. Oh, actually, we've learned that fat is essential to staying alive, you know. Don't eat carbohydrate, you know, and that's the American style, and it's really, you know, like infected so many things like education. And every time I hear about, you know, standardized tests or emphasis on math or something, my skin kind of crawls. I mean, I'm glad somebody knows math, but it just can't be right to pile everything up on one side as a reaction to something that is seen as like, oh my God, all the jobs are going to China. We all have to be exactly like them on all of our math. You know, it's like, that's just dumb. You know, we overreact. So a balanced thing is obviously better. And the other thing is that, like, it was so much, the ancient top 40 radio that was all that you had was kind of good for you because you had to listen to stuff you didn't want to, you know, but you might learn a lot from that. I think I did. And I think education ought to be like that. You know, you might be like a sports kid and you just like art, and then you get in there and you love art. You had no idea it was in your head. How are you going to know? You know, kids are supposed to be like 3-year-olds that are filling out the college applications now with an aim toward their career, you know, by some things you read, and it's just creepy. So definitely the well-rounded person is just going to have a better life because you're more adaptable. You're going to be a more adaptable artist. You're going to be more artistic. You're going to be a better artist who's able to, like, fix their tape machine because you actually are sort of tech, you know? I mean, all that stuff, you never know what you're capable of until you get to sort of dip your toe in it. So like I say, the ancient liberal education model of a little bit of knowledge about everything, and then you kind of find yourself, just makes sense to me, you know?
Do you think that over time, and like looking at different eras of what education is, or at least in different eras of music, do you think that you can kind of relate that to what was going on in education at the time? I know everything informs us culturally, but especially education.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'm not going to try to think about that now because I'll take up too much time, but I think you're right. I think that's totally right.
Any thoughts on education? And, you know, because honestly,
we are because we're talking about audio technology and on audio, we have a tendency to be both in the creative mindset and also in a very structured technical mindset because we have to be. And we're, the last session we're talking about audio over internet protocol, which, oh my Lord, we're asking engineers who are suddenly fine with a channel strip and signal flow to not think that way. We're thinking about integrated network switches coming from every direction. We're really thinking about all these things. And,
Well, since what we do, audio engineering is a combination, obviously, of science and art. The art is the bottom line, but I always think of it as a continuum. Science is over here and art's over here. We have to operate somewhere in the middle. My career, I've always thought it's about the art, but we've got to understand the science, the physics and the electronics and all that stuff, but only to the end of being able to do the art correctly. So I try to understand the science as much as possible so that I think the more we understand the science, it just makes a bigger palette within which we build the art. We can only build art within our skill set and the physics that we understand.
Yeah, it all gets kind of beautiful. The tech stuff gets to be sort of art, when you get the azimuth just right, the oscilloscope just makes you feel good. There's that perfect
but there is that danger of the science being the bottom line, the true engineer. And I think sometimes we talk about digital audio and consoles and networking, things like that. It feels much less artistic. And it's important stuff. But in education, I think it should always be shared with the bottom line, the goal of being the art. I could show anybody how to turn the threshold knob on any compressor, but why did we know the threshold knob on the compressor is what we wanted to turn? That whole mindset.
I don't know that, I was lucky. I knew from a young age I wanted to do music, and I know a lot of people don't know what they want to do from a young age. And I absolutely 100% think that art should be involved in education. And I don't really think, I think it's funny that we think they're separate.
Yeah. That
arts and sciences are two different things. They're not. It's just information, it's learning. And I think that too many times, at least in secondary, like high school type education, there's too much of a focus on this test or this course is a means to an end. But it's not. It's just a means to learning. And the more you learn about the world, the art in it, and the things that you can create in it, the more you realize that everything is really connected. And one of the things I always say when we have graduations at Blackbird is, rule number one is just because you're done doesn't mean you stop learning. You're just getting started. So I don't, it's never made sense to me why we would have one and not the other. I think they go together.
I think we started probably about 10 minutes late, so I have one more thing I want to address. The one thing that I think that we obviously all have in common here, obviously, other than audio and music.
And black shirts.
Black shirt.
Yeah.
Of course.
Similar dressing style.
Yeah.
We have Winston-Salem in this area and the Triad in common. Obviously, by being here and being involved in this market, it's all influenced us in certain ways. And this is, of course, super regional question or thought, but in what ways has the area influenced us? And obviously, this goes back and touches on creative people here, creative elements here, creative motivations here. What's special about this area? And what I think is exciting is that events like this that shows exactly how much interest there is in creative things, especially in the Triad, and especially in North Carolina and this region. Any thoughts on the Triad and how it might have, or the area and how it might have shaped you?
I don't know. There was a really good music scene when I was beginning to play, and I everybody I knew had guitars and amps and stuff that were just kind of there. And when I started the studio and I started meeting people from all over the place, they were always amazed at how much stuff we had, and we'd all just gotten it around town. I get the impression that maybe this is some ancient connection to the thing that people are always trying to draw, which seems a little suspect for people my age, but this notion of the Appalachian, pickers and stuff, there are an awful lot of guitars around here, compared to some places. I don't know, but that's probably the whole South, But the town, just from my sort of suburban kid perspective, was just kind of a good, well-balanced place. We had 2 pretty good radio stations, and people listened to them, and there was a lot of events, the DJs were kind of stars and all that stuff. It made music seem cool and fun. That was probably the most important thing to me. And maybe a lot of other towns were the same, but it seemed like if you wanted to get on that sort of little river of like pop music and showbiz and all that, it was kind of felt alive. Other people were doing it. There were like we used to be able to play at all these churches that had these coffee houses and stuff. Like when we were like 12 and stuff. So you had a place to play, so it all seemed to mean something. So that was something specific to me and my friends that really helped us. Just the ability to get out in public and do the thing. That's what I would say.
Any other thoughts about that? I think that's very interesting though, about what you said about the bluegrass thing. I'll get back to that.
Well, I haven't lived in Detroit in about 3.5 years, so I don't know what the scene is like currently. And I just got here like last night at 2 a.m., so I haven't had a chance to check it out. But I know when I was learning to play and coming up, there was a pretty cool scene. I mean, there was a bunch of different genres and lots of different places you could go play. People appreciated it. Even if you were a little bit different, there was a place you could go where people were into that. I always kind of felt part of it when I was in bands and stuff. I felt like I kind of found my place amongst those musicians and being able to play around with great. So.
I'm actually from Charlotte, so not too far, but I think this would apply. I have incredible memories when I was younger of not only playing in bands and doing the whole rock club thing, but also one time particularly my dad said, you need to go to this place. And it was the Double Door, which is a very old, famous, little tiny music venue in Charlotte. And there was a jazz night. And I got to hear crazy local musicians just do a jam session, jazz style. And it completely just blew my mind, because before that it was rock and roll. It was power chords, it was the 80s, and it was 57s on Marshall amps cranked as loud as they could go, and that's one style. But to hear that, just being exposed to a really broad local music scene had a huge impact on my career for sure. And I imagine it's similar here, I would hope.
I think the thing interesting to me about North Carolina is like, after college, I went to the West Coast for a while. People were asking me what it was like, and I was trying to explain, and then I finally thought, every 2 hours, you're going to hit a university town when you drive across the state. And there's a lot of these pockets, and it is a very college-oriented environment. Maybe that's because our state was the first to have the first public university system in the country, and we were the first with the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and these various things. Combination of that and Mitch, you mentioned the thing about the bluegrass, there being a lot of that, but there probably might be something to that, or at least it's been nurtured into that, because now there seems to be a very big folk influenced.
Yeah.
Not like you're pouring all these extra like sonic elements into it, and people are more picking up these acoustic instruments.
Well, that's certainly, they've certainly come back, haven't they?
Yeah,
I'm not sure how I feel about that, but
I know, right?
Because that's the thing. Like when I was first ever doing like interviews and stuff, I would talk to people from other parts of the country, and the South is still the weird part of the country. And if you go back like 30 years, that you were still kind of like from another planet, to some people, which was kind of amusing, And of course they were right, but they would always ask me these questions as though, they were pretty sure I'd grown up without electricity and we never could afford a radio or stuff like that, and they would just. So I would just love to tell them that, no, for me it was Pete Townsend. You know what I mean? It was just like, my music is from electronic sources from other continents, really. But, you never know what's in your, genetic makeup, and I'm not going to deny a little bit of, finger picking back there somewhere that I don't know about, maybe, it is true, an awful lot of music, well, art in general is kind of good in the South, which is weird, right? Because it's
it is.
Like Mississippi has this disproportionate number of writers, in a state with probably a disproportionate number of illiterate people. It's just the South is just, maybe it's the tremendous conflicted, paradoxical aspects of the South are actually kind of good for stirring things up,
But yeah, I like a things, it's like, I have time on my hands and I'm out more of it like an urban, suburban area. And I'm gonna pick up this instrument and spend my time doing that because I don't have as many distractions, or I'm gonna create my own scene.
And they closed the mill, so what else are you gonna do, right? I mean,
That's right.
well, get out your synth, you know.
Well,
and-
play it.
Yeah.
Very cool. Guys, I really appreciate your time today. I think this has been a lot of fun and nice to meet each one of you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions from the audience or attendees, or you can also catch up afterwards too. But please, if there are any questions or comments, I'd love if you guys to share. Good.
I guess we covered everything there is, you know, so there's just no questions.
I don't know, maybe like individual questions, that sort of.
It's all been nailed down.
Anyway, thanks for everybody. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it.